Organizational culture. It's way more important than the technology, the strategy and business processes, yet many organizations ignore it. I'm thrilled to talk to you today about how to discover your organization's DNA and leverage your organization's culture for your success. I'm delighted to be invited by the Institute for Inspired Organizational Cultures to talk with you today. Here's an overview of what we'll cover. First, why organizations are failing. It's totally predictable and avoidable. And how they're designed to fail. And then talk about what is an organization's culture. It's that intangible stuff. It's very hard to put a definition to. And what is an organization's cultural DNA? And then how to leverage your organizational culture for your benefit. And then a conclusion. So why are organizations failing? According to some research from an MIT study of global teams, they're failing for entirely predictable and avoidable reasons. Can you guess? Can you guess why they're failing? It's pretty simple. 80% of global teams said they are failing to achieve their own goals. And the reason they're failing, number one reason, they fail to build trust. They fail to build trust. They haven't even built relationships, let alone trusting relationships. Number two, communication barriers. And this has nothing to do with language or country culture. This has everything to do with human beings communicating with each other. And I can prove it's not to do with culture, because anyone married to someone from their same culture, their same native language, you have trouble communicating? Exactly. It has nothing to do with country or culture. The third reason teams are failing is the goals of the team and the team members are not aligned. One's going this way, one's going that way. And the fourth reason, team vision and goals aren't even clear. So how could they be aligned? They're not even clear. I studied physics. I was prepared to handle all kinds of complicated problems. These seem so simple, right? It's all human skills. At HP for 10 years. I was at startups for 5 years. I consult with organizations all over the world. And what I found is organizations are failing because they're designed to fail. And let me tell you what I mean by that. First of all, organizations typically are arranged in a hierarchy. Now, the hierarchy, in my opinion, has become pretty much irrelevant for a lot of work that's going on in many organizations. Because for a business, for example, a typical org chart, who's missing from the org chart? Fairly important people that you're depending on for your success, right? Like customers. They don't care who's the boss. You can't order them around. Suppliers, distributors, okay, you have some leverage over them. Retailers, partners, regulatory agencies, government officials, communities. You know, you don't have control over all of the people that you need to work with. You don't have command and control authority over the stakeholders who are vital to your success. So hierarchy makes no sense. And by the way, command and control is obsolete. Nobody wants to be bossed around. Even the military is not using command and control these days. You know, people on the ground, at the front lines, what's happening, those are the guys who make the decisions. Again, the reason for failure is designed in through this concept of management. You know the difference between a manager and a leader? There's a difference, right? I mean, everybody inherently feels that there's a difference between a manager and a leader. And usually, when I ask people to describe it, they describe management as being pretty negative. Why? People don't want to be managed. I have a little saying that guides me. Lead people, manage cows. It's kind of a joke, but what I mean is manage budget, manage schedule, manage resources, but lead people. I mean, do you want to be managed, really? And what kind of leaders do people willingly follow? There's a lot of research on this. I love the leadership challenge work that Barry Posner and Jim Kouzes did. And they found that the people that others willingly follow have many characteristics, but the top four, the number one characteristic of leaders that are willingly followed is they're honest. Number 2 is they're forward-looking. Number 3, they're inspiring. And number 4, they're competent. Now think about that. Honest, forward-looking, inspiring, and competent. None of those have anything to do with position in an organization chart or title on your business card. In fact, you can lead from any chair in the organization. How? By acting like a leader, communicating like a leader, and thinking like a leader. And it's obsolete to depend on position in an organization chart and title on a business card for your leadership status. Leaders act, ACT, action, communication, and thinking. Now, all of this relates to organization's culture. But what is an organization's culture? It's as invisible as the air that we breathe, but it's as hard as concrete. And it impacts everything that happens in an organization. So let's talk about culture. Here's an iceberg model of culture. This is very popular. You know, what is culture? It's behaviors, it's skills and knowledge, it's attitudes and beliefs, values, identity, purpose, and the environment. You know what? For me, organization's culture, it's the stories that you tell the new guy. When the new person joins your organization, you know, the old timers take them aside and say, let me tell you the way things are done around here. That is how you find out the real culture of an organization. It's not a plaque on the wall or a poster or a slogan that HR put out or that the executives are chanting. It's the stories we tell about the way things are done around here. Now, when you have different cultures colliding, it causes problems. You hire somebody who's not a good fit for your organization. You know, they're very focused on task, and you're more of a relationship-based organization. There's going to be a culture clash. Now, I see this a lot in Japanese companies that I work with, where the Japanese people are very much focused on the relationships and the long-term thinking, and my American colleagues are focused on the task and getting results and pretty much willing to sacrifice long-term for short-term gain. But I think this iceberg model has limitations. So I've been working with an island model instead. Think about islands, like the Hawaiian Islands, for example. They all look like they're separate islands. Have you ever been to Hawaii? They're all separate islands. You look, you know, fly over in your plane and they're separate islands. But if you go down below the surface, you find out they're all connected. And we can use that model as a much more effective way to think about different organizational cultures or even cultures within companies. I mean, if you go in a company and you look at the accounting and finance department, you're going to find a very different kind of culture than if you go into engineering or you go into the sales department. I mean, getting sales guys to talk to engineering guys, it's like having giraffes talk to hippopotamus. So it's a very big culture clash, even among functional groups. So here's how the island model of culture works for me. On the surface, you see the directly observable behaviors. And of course, below the surface, in each of these organizations, there are factors that influence those behaviors. For example, the founders' stories and the historical moments that have made an impact on people. But if you go further down, you will get to the shared foundation where all human beings have something in common. And what are the things they have in common? Well, let's look at this example of what some of the things we have in common. It's a fear of failure. It's a need to be listened to feel like maybe you have an impact. It's the need to be appreciated. You know, getting a positive comment once in a while. Those things are true across human beings. I've worked with people in over 50 different countries, and in every case I've found they like to be listened to generously, as if what they're saying matters. They want to be appreciated, and they don't want to make mistakes or have failures. So it makes it pretty hard to innovate, doesn't it? If you're afraid to make a mistake or fail in any way. Hey, I'm from the Silicon Valley. We eat failure for breakfast. Failure there is just one more step towards success. that's not the norm for human beings around the world. So let's talk more about the organization's culture from the standpoint of this thing called cultural DNA. This is a very popular term now in some parts of business. For example, talk about what's our DNA? Who are we at our core? And a lot of times this refers to the founder stories or key moments in the history of an organization, what made us what we are today. And just like the DNA of a snake or a bird, it determines whether your organization is going to crawl or fly. But it's not static. Just as in the real DNA in the real animal world, you can evolve, you can change. DNA can adapt and evolve. Some ways to make this intangible thing more real are to do a few exercises or have a few discussions with your colleagues. If you just ask somebody, hey, write down what our culture is, write down our DNA, you're going to get some glossy pamphlet from the HR department that everybody will just stick in the trash can. But if you really want to understand who are we, what's our identity, and what made us like this, have conversations about the products you would never make. Can you imagine Disney making porno films? Probably not. It's not in their DNA. They're just never going to do it. How about slogans we'll never use? I work with some companies who thought these were some good slogans they would never use. Who cares whether our customers are happy with us? Or all we care about is making a profit. Our products are crap. Yeah. So if you talk with people about the kinds of slogans they don't want to see, you're going to have an easy time figuring out what really matters. What are your core values of your organization? How about headlines you'll never want to see in the newspaper? That's a great way to illuminate this intangible quality called organizational culture and cultural DNA. Have you got some headlines you wouldn't like to see about your company, your organization, your family? That will pretty quickly tell you what you really care about, what matters most. How about this one? This is a lot of fun. Famous people who will never represent your brand. Deciding who you wouldn't want to represent you can much more quickly illuminate who you would want to represent your brand. So if you ask people to define the culture, if you ask people to define the cultural DNA, they will scratch their heads and be puzzled. But if you ask them what the culture is not, what the cultural DNA is not, it's far easier. And then you can simply reverse it. That's my recommendation of how to get to the essence of who you are quickly, and it's quite a lot of fun. Okay, so now that you have a little better idea of what is an organization's culture and what is its cultural DNA, I'd like to share some ideas about how to leverage that culture for your benefit. I think the most effective way to identify and clarify your organization's culture and share it and leverage it is to tell stories. Stories work. Stories are powerful. People remember stories. Stories make an impact. There's an emotional impact. All of this stuff is not all left brain analytical. When you're talking about culture and organizational DNA, some of my analytical engineering technology friends, they call that the touchy-feely stuff, the soft stuff. But let me tell you, the soft stuff is what's killing organizations today. So here's some recommendations on how you can get to the heart of what matters most for your organization through your stories. Look at the founder's stories first. How did your organization get started? Often these are very inspiring stories. I work with Yamaha Motors. The guy who started Yamaha was the guy who made the Yamaha organ, the musical instrument. He carried that thing on his back over the mountains to Tokyo, only to find out that it was rejected because it was poorly tuned. He carried it all the way back home over the mountains, fixed it, and carried it back again, carrying it on a stick on his back with another friend of his. Now, people still tell that story over 100 years later. It's so inspiring. There's probably a lot of negative stories they could tell, but that's the story that inspires them and sticks in their mind. So when I work with organizations and I want them to really understand their organization's culture, I ask them, tell me the stories of your founders, your early days, the difficult times, when you struggled, when you came near bankruptcy, when you had to do something heroic to continue on and survive. And then I ask them to silently draw their impression of these stories. Now, silent drawing is really powerful technique, especially if you have people who hesitate to speak up, or if you have people with different language abilities. So you tell the story, and then you have them go to a whiteboard together, and together draw a story that captures the essence of that inspiring story. Don't believe anything I say. Just try that exercise. Draw together your impression of the founding of your organization and the development through the tough times. Another thing that really works is using visuals. We've all heard, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I like to use collage when I'm asking people to describe their organization's culture. We sit in a circle, we tell stories, and we capture a few key words that are the essence of our identity and our culture. And what kind of stories do we tell? We tell stories about people we admire, colleagues that we think represent our organization at its best, stories from the past, as I've already mentioned, and stories from the future. What stories do you hope you'll be able to tell 10 years from now, 50 years from now? What stories do you hope people will be telling about you at your retirement party? Or maybe when you're long gone from the organization? Tell those stories and capture those vividly in words and images in a way that you'll never achieve with words alone. Just a poster on the wall saying our values, our mission, our vision, those are empty words, and that creates cynicism. It takes a lot of courage to bring up issues of organizational culture, to say, let's sit around and tell stories together. You know, a lot of people are busy. What are they doing? They're really busy, right? They're checking email all day long. Okay, that is not the organization's most important work. Oh, and 90% of managers, by the way, are not working on their organization's most strategic goals. Only 10% of managers, according to research, are working on the organization's most important work. What are they doing? Distracting themselves with busy work. And people are really down on meetings. Oh, I don't want to go to another meaningless meeting. The end of the meeting, the only thing we've accomplished is to agree to meet again. There's a lot of cynicism around meetings. And if you start to talk about organizational culture, people might say, oh, that's the HR department's job. Or, oh, that's the touchy-feely stuff. Oh, that's the soft skills. But I'm going to urge you to raise your hand and say, let's work on our culture. So organizations are failing because of organizational culture and human skills. They're not failing because of a lack of technology, products, or business processes, or discipline. They're failing because they failed to address the organization's culture. They have failed to design an organization that could be healthy and vibrant. So if you want to impact your organization, increase your revenue, increase your profit, increase your customers' delight or your stakeholders if you're a nonprofit, and make your employees much more engaged, you've got to focus on your culture. Over 70% of employees in the US are not engaged in their work. And a good chunk of them are actively disengaged, or they're actively working against their own organization. So put up your hand, leading from any chair, and say, let's create our organizational culture purposefully. So think about this. You're going to retire someday. I know you're young and you're learning and you're just at the beginning of your career perhaps, but you're going to retire someday, and I want you to think about what stories your people will tell about you and your impact on the organization. Hey, I'm retiring. What will they say? Well, he always answered his email promptly. Well, he sure did go to a lot of meetings. Or maybe they'll say that you inspired major changes in the direction of the company, that you always listened to people generously, that you created an environment where people could trust each other and speak openly and honestly, where communication was full of healthy conflict, where there was real commitment and real accountability for results. Maybe they'll tell stories about you that inspire generations to come. I mean, maybe at your 100th birthday, people will show up and thank you for the impact you've had on an organization. Wouldn't that be incredible? It could happen. All you need to do is look around and say, gosh, maybe I'm somehow responsible for creating this culture that I'm complaining about. You know, I find that nobody feels responsible for culture. I go around asking, who is creating the sick, twisted, dysfunctional culture here? Nobody raises their hand. It's me, Kimberly. I'm doing it. No, nobody feels responsible for changing the culture either. So if you want to be remembered in a good way for having a huge impact on your organization, think about what you can do today to have the important conversations about what matters most in your organization, and that is the organization's culture. What are the stories that you need to tell that are going to inspire this generation and the next generation of people to live up to the great hopes of your founders? Often the founder spirit is lost as the organization ages. And even successful organizations fail. I mean, over half of the Fortune 500 companies fall off the list every 10 years. So just because you're successful now doesn't mean you're going to be great 10 years from now or 100 years from now. And guess what? No one lives forever. So do you want to leave a legacy? Something that people will remember you by? I know I do. I want to leave a legacy. People say, Kimberly changed the world. Maybe just a small piece of it, but I want to make a difference, not just make a living. And I urge you to do the same. Thank you.